Welcome to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble, powered by Concierge Resource Professional Consultant. Courageous Conversation is a diversity, equality, exclusive initiative. It's a gracious space for a meaningful discussion about culture, life, business, work, learn, live, worship, and play. It's an audio encyclopedia to design, bridges, cultures, and generational gaps. Through active listening and action-oriental changes toward liberation for all.
Hello, everybody. This is Teresa Gamble, the host of Courageous Conversations with Teresa Gamble on Mixed Talk Media, based out of Houston, Texas. Today, we are continuing the conversation with the most notorious, the most illustrious, Adonnica Toler, the African-American historian, our reoccurring guest. And now we're going to talk about her role, how she transitioned without an interview to become the museum assistant at the Ritz Theater, and how she achieved the title of museum administrator. Hey, Adonnica!
Hey, Teresa.
Welcome. So we just gonna jump right in because I want to hear about this journey and how it can inspire others who are so in love history and want to be able to do more to make an impact in their community. So our last conversation, you talked about how you volunteered at Eartha White Mission in Jacksonville, Florida. You volunteered when they was doing the revitalization and reopening of the Ritz Theater Museum in Jacksonville, Florida. And the director at that time saw your work ethic of volunteerism and immediately offered you a job. No interview, no nothing. Your works was the interview. So from getting this opportunity as a museum assistant, what does that look like? And how long did it take you to become the administrator of the museum?
All right, so a museum assistant, that is the responsibilities and the projects and things that need to be done in a museum are vast, and there are different avenues of which you can be, there are many job opportunities in a museum that many people are not aware of. So I was the museum assistant to the museum administrator at the time, Lydia Stewart, and it was her job to manage the museum as far as the exhibits. She selected the exhibits we would show, the upkeep of the museum, installation of the exhibits, developing programming around the exhibits, and just and anything that just fell into place that needed to be done. I know that's really general, but those who work in the museum understand exactly what I'm saying, what I mean by that. They're so big. When you work in a museum, it's interdisciplinary. And so you also have to be, at least in my experience here at the Ritz, you have to be able to switch on a dime if necessary. And that happens all the time, even now. Even today, with interviewing with you today, I did a tour before I came on today. And so what that counted for me, my responsibility is I actually, we were a small staff, we still are, but I actually was responsible for the museum on the weekends, Saturday and Sundays. I was the museum staff person, and then there was security here, but I was responsible for the tours that came through or any visiting that came through. I collected the money and reported, and I had a weekly report of money earned and the number of people who came through the museum. Those numbers are very valuable for when you do grants. I never had to write a grant, but grant writing is a very important part of raising money and support for projects. And there are grants that, are awarded for what we do in different aspects. So having the number of people who come through, ages, all those things. So I was responsible for that. And I was responsible for when we did exhibit installation. I probably made sure that the captions were done properly, that anything that we needed for the installation was available. I know how to work tools, drills, the nails, anything that had to do with the actual installation process. I would make sure those things were lined up. And the museum administrator did that too, but I tended to go ahead and get the ball rolling. And by the time, she would say, okay, we need this and get that. So we've got that. Check, 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 check. It was ready. And there was a system. And I was really fortunate. My museum administrator and later a gentleman who was a volunteer who ended up being our archivist, we were the ones that installed the exhibit. We called ourselves the A-team. We did not have to discuss about what needed to be done to have an exhibit. Myself and Eunice Asami, he's now deceased, rest his soul. It was when we knew an exhibit was coming up, I automatically started saying, do we have this? Do we have that? He would do the same thing too. Now, the thing with Eunice, he did not allow us to lift anything or climb the ladder. So he always made sure that he had what he needed for installation. And we just gelled, and it was just easy. We worked together, and the goal was to represent the African American community in its best light in the museum. Because there are many people who, especially children, Black and white, have not been to an African American museum. And I have to tell you, for me, for a Black child to come in to a museum and it's all African American, all African, it does something for them. Their demeanor really changes by the time they leave, when they have learned, after they've been in the museum and learned what they learned. They have a different little pep in their step. They got a little, like, oh, okay. And they even say, I remember one young boy, he kept saying, there's nothing but Black people in here. He said it the entire tour. So what I do is so important when it comes to Black children identifying and finding out that they are special. I would say that is the most important thing that this job does when I do this job. This is the most important thing. I promise you, if you're here, you can see, I've had Black children ask me, why do white people have everything and Black kids don't? And they're asking this question, and they have a white teacher.
Wow.
And guess what? I answer them.
So let me interrupt before you keep going. So being a museum assistant or administrator or an archivist, you all are crafting and creating exhibits for people to have an experience.
Yes.
Not just collecting information.
Right.
I want to specify that, because some museums is there for information.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying and describing your role is to make sure every visitor, every person, regardless of their age, race, creed, color, and religion, is to have an experience with the African American history culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
And that's it. And that is, when you see how the museum is laid out and the people we incorporate, it is about the experience. Just, you talked about your mother was a domestic. A lot of times when we think about a Black person being a domestic or a janitor, but to me, if that Black woman was not restricted by society, that's a businesswoman. She got a business. She's managing a whole nother household. She had to be doing good for them to keep her there. So to me, when I give tours, that's how I say that. Wow. I say that if she had the privilege to choose whatever she wanted to do, that's a business. That's a cleaning service. One of these cleaning services around here, that's that. But how society was set up, she went there and she spent all those hours managing that house, and to sometimes, neglecting her own house because she had to work and her husband had to work, and to help take care of the family. So that is actually how I present a domestic. I don't say, oh, she would, yeah, and I put in context why she was in that position and what that means and why. And this the other thing I say to kids. So anybody who knows me, they know I do not play about being disrespectful in the museum. In fact, I greet the group with, you're going to be respectful. This is holy ground. These are people who went through some things so I could stand here. I said, some of them will be, if they were to come back, they will be amazed to see a Black woman running a museum like this because they knew where they were. I am an answer to somebody's prayer. That's how I see it. So this holy ground, like if you don't want to be here, get your chaperone and you go sit back on the bus. Because this holy, we're not going to come in here and be disrespectful. I said, these people couldn't walk through the front door of a white-owned business. You can. Some of these people got in trouble because they learned how to read and write. And you have to go to school and you cut up and act the fool. And so we're not doing that today. And so if you really don't want to be bothered, you're not hurting my feelings, but I do demand that the ancestors are respected. And that's how I even go off in it. And they be like, but see, what happens is, psychology for us as Black people, I'm telling you, we're important. And I'm demanding you give them this respect. So if you've never heard that before, and all you've seen is what you see Ray Ray and, and I say this, I say, you see Ray Ray getting arrested, but how many times have you seen me on TV? And I tell them, you're standing in an award-winning museum. Wow. You are looking and talking to an internationally known museum curator. Wow. So how many times have you seen me on? What? And you're like, well, never. I said, okay. So now, when I talk about excellence and doing the work, regardless of what people think about you, say about you, you have this. I said, you've met somebody. And I said, I'll tell you that there are still challenges because we focus on African American Museum. We don't get the accolades that we should get, that we should be getting. And it's because we're doing the African American history. I said, another museum in town could do an exhibit on African American history and it's all the rave. But we're doing this 24/7. There's never a time where you're not represented in this building. And I said, but I still do the work. I'm still responsible for doing the work. And so this is the work. And I am internationally known. I said, people know me in South Africa by name. They know me in France by name. You are. And the other day I said, you talking to one bad chick right here. And they was like, I said, you better know you good. I said, but you better be good. So you could talk. I said, because I can back up what I'm saying. Because you're in this museum. I run this museum. And so that's what I do. And I said, look at what James Weldon Johnson had to go through. He was a principal, a lawyer, but there were certain things he could not do. And if he did certain things, he could lose his life simply because of what society says a Black person is supposed to do or not do. So that is how I present it. Now they get it. They start saying, oh, how you know? I say, you want to be a lawyer? Let me tell you about Daniel Webster Perkins. That's how I do it. You're going to be a doctor? Let me tell you about this doctor right here. Let me tell you what he did back in so and so. And that's how I present it to them. So they do say, well, I do want to be a lawyer. Anybody else I'm supposed to know? I mean, the kids are surprised. The teachers go like, they ain't never been like that. Like, you don't know how to deal with your children. But what it is they saw themselves in the museum. And then this Black woman, she sounds like she knows what she's talking about. And she telling me, I can do this. This is your heritage. This is your heritage also. Right. And so they do ask me, they're like, well, okay, anybody else I need to know? And they get a piece of paper and I'll tell them the name. And I say, you go look that person up. If you have any questions, you could call me if you need me to help you. I said, but your teachers will help you. And I said, once you start it, you won't have any problems. And so
So I want to chime on that part when you said some of the teachers was impressed how you engage with the students. So does that speak to how more cultural instruction or either critical race theory needs to be facilitated for teachers or educators or professional development to help them draw that connection from Black and brown children?
Exactly. I agree.
History.
I agree, because it's also the Chinese, it's the Asians, it's the Mexicans. All those ethnic groups that are here in this country have shaped this country. And there's things we're doing all the time. I mean, if you love tacos, I mean, where do tacos come from? I mean, come on. So how can and when people say about the immigrants coming from Mexico, and they say, tell them to go back home. Excuse me, in case you didn't know, past the Mississippi all the way to California was Mexico.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was Mexico. There were haciendas among the native Indians, the natives, because they weren't Indians. And how about California is named after a Black goddess? Who actually, and who was said to be a warrior queen, like was a fierce fighter in war.
Okay, we're gonna talk about her on the next.
But I'm just telling you. But so when they talk about, but a lot of times, and here's this: when they talk about critical race theory,
right,
there's always an issue about it when it's dealing with African Americans. We're that thorn in the flesh that they don't want to pull out and deal with it.
That's a good way to describe it.
Asians, I mean, any other ethnic group, I mean, Asians got reparations because they were put in camps during World War II, which they should not have, and I'm not demeaning that, but there was no argument about that. It was no debate about that. Right. All the other ethnic groups, Chinatown, oh, it's wonderful, oh, they don't do that. But man, when it comes to us,
right,
there's always this, oh, you lazy, you didn't do this, but you got your wealth off the back of the sweat and tears of our ancestors.
Free labor, right?
Free labor.
Yeah.
So
how can you help those that want to be an ally of the African American culture to move the narrative? Because I've been having a conversation with a lot of my allies of privilege that, you know, even though you put a diversity statement up and say that you support us and you support the injustices, but it has moved, the needle has moved beyond and past that, just recognizing it and making a statement. You know, their privileged position can get them to tables and in rooms and to make decisions or have viable input to really change the narrative for Black and brown communities, but especially Black communities. What as a role as a museum assistant to an administrator that you play when they come to you for these tours or the organizations you speak at to help them understand how vital and important your role is?
Yes. Well, generally, just what I've shared with you, I did speak to a major NFL team on Juneteenth, and I gave them the history of, and I gave them, because Florida, it's May 20th, you know me. So I gave them the full history, but I talked about the complexity when you're talking about race here in the country, the complexity of it. See, we don't want to deal with that. We've got to deal with, you got to deal with that George Washington had slaves. Okay, he the father of the country, but he had slaves. And what does that mean about a slave? What does that mean that if I own you? I mean, let's just be, I don't care how nice he is.
Right.
He owns somebody. I mean, even now. So let's just say, yes, that's so, and that it wasn't right, and let's move forward on it. And let's not hide it under the country. I mean, when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and all of that, he had slaves and at Monticello, and the way he designed his house, it was designed, his mansion, it was designed that you wouldn't see the slaves. and they were walking all up under the house, and they had mazes up under the house. But he did that so you wouldn't see them, but they were out there working.
Wow.
So I let them know, I said, there are many of us, and even if you're in this country, it is ingrained in you that somehow Black people are inferior. Unless you have gone in and pulled that out of your system or dealt with it, you think that. I don't care how many buddy friends you have that happen to be Black.
Right.
If you have not honestly dealt with the fact that you've been hearing it, that Blacks are inferior and that it's only a few that make it, but you don't deal with the fact that once we do figure out the system, the game changes, the plan, the rules change. Mm-hmm. And so you may admire me, I'm educated, but I'm not the only educated, smart Black person. There are some who have not even been to college, who has greater wisdom and knowledge than me, but because they look a certain way or they were born in a certain area that you are too afraid to go to because you believe what media says about that person. And I even talked to a media group about it. I said, the way you present certain sides of town, I have to tell you've been wrong in how you've been doing it. Right. You got a perception about a certain side of town that you don't even know the people, right. But you got other residents of this city who feel like, don't go over there, but you don't report when there's crime in the upper class neighborhoods too. There's crime happening there all the time. It doesn't make the news, and they know it's happening.
Right.
So that is your subconscious mind doing that, because if they're robbing over there in the high end neighborhood as much as and sometimes more than over here, you're not going to report that. You're going to report, they expect to hear from there, so we're going to do that. And I've seen the pattern, and I have addressed it with some news people that I know. That you have to, everybody in this country has to go in and deep and think about, how do you think about people, certain people.
So with that retrospect, you done spoke to professional NFL teams in Jacksonville, Florida. You have brought to the attention of the media in the area on how different communities are represented in the media in the negative light or a positive light. Is that part of your role as a museum administrator, or is that your African-American historical side of you? Or is it?
That's me, Adonnica. I mean, I think it's
right.
They're this one and the same because it's me. Because right. I don't think I would be doing my job properly if I don't address those issues. Wow. Because the exhibits that I show address segregation and racism, but it also celebrates. I do an art show that has international acclaim, that has been in a museum in South Africa, and that same museum is sending me an exhibit. So I celebrate the beauty of being African and African American, but I also deal with the challenges. And people have a problem that I deal with the challenges. And they keep saying, let the sleeping dog lie, but the dog not sleep.
Oh, that's a good one. Now
the dog is not sleep.
No, he is not.
The dog is. That's why we keep seeing the repeat of what's happening with Floyd and all the and Breonna and how African Americans are represented in the law. But see, in the law, it says we're 3/5 of a person. It's a law that said that.
Right. In the Constitution.
It's a law that says, okay, when slaves are free, they freed the 13th Amendment, but if you arrest them because they don't have a job, then you can put them back, you can put them on a plantation and put them back to work, which is almost like putting them back to slavery. It's a law. So we've been just misrepresented
right.
and unfairly misrepresented and represented in the law. The law has not been good to us in this country. It has.
Right. So that's why it's even more relevant than now that we have museum assistants and administrators such as yourself to keep the African American museums alive. So our story can be shared of the contributions, regardless how small or how great they were, because they all made an impact, some way, form, or fashion. So in doing so, as a museum administrator, what is one of the worst things you experienced? And what is one of the most outstanding things you have experienced in walking in this role for over 25 plus years?
The horrific one?
Or either something worse. It could be something that happened on a tour. It could have been a gesture or a comment or reaction that you may have experienced that you had to self-correct individuals, because we tend to have to do that a lot in our culture. We always have to re-educate people, or in other words, let me break it down in layman's terms. We have to check folks and let them know your understanding is not the correct.
Yeah.
What has there been an experience in your role? Because in Jacksonville is very conservative, and women is not respected in a leadership role or influential role. So they always have to be accompanied by some a male influential counterpart. Because even with me in my role, there's only certain rooms or tables or opportunities I can get for so forth, that glass ceiling, so to speak.
Right.
And I have to use, what have you ever experienced that in your role? That if you can recall. If not, that's
and
good.
I think when you say the negative, I don't know, because I am so straightforward, they be like, okay, we're gonna mess with that one.
Right.
And except now one time it was a teenager, and I think I'm so straightforward with it. But one time a teenager just said, well, go back where you came from. I said, you go back where you came from. You going back to Ireland. And the look on his face was like, what? Like, I said, unless your last name is Eagle Wolf or Dancing with Wolves, you're not native here either. And I said, that's not totally true. I said, there were some Europeans who were here before this became the United States of America, but that's few and far between. I said, you're more than likely for somebody who came over when the Irish was out of potatoes and came over, and I did that. Okay. But nobody where I actually had to really get down with them on it.
You have been listening to Courageous Conversation with Teresa W. Gamble. Courageous Conversation is powered by Concierge Resource Professional Consultant. Would you like to be a guest and have your story, lesson, and best practice to be captured in an audio encyclopedia? We are currently reviewing applications for future guests to join us, and we're especially interested in creating spaces for long-standing or multi-generational Black-owned businesses. For more information and to be considered, please email info@crpcnow.com to request an application. Be not weary in well-doing. You shall reap if you faint not. Galatians 6:9.